My grandfather was born in 1907, and during the time that he was born, there weren't a lot of jobs for blacks in Greenville, North Carolina. So he actually had to leave his family and came up north to Washington, D.C., where he was a maitre d', and that's where he worked for 32 years and would travel back to Greenville, North Carolina to visit his family and, of course, would send money home. Meanwhile, his wife, my grandmother, and his family were back in Greenville, and they were picking tobacco and picking cotton and working 16-hour days. During that time, my father was growing up in Greenville, North Carolina, and remembers vividly the story that his grandmother, my great-grandmother, told. And so she remembers very vividly the lynchings that occurred, and it was silent in the whole city. And you could hear the horse and buggy going through town, and it was complete silence. And you saw an African American person, their head was covered, and all you could hear was the clop, clop, clop of the horses. And so it was very silent in the town. And the way the cart was set up, it actually had the hanging mechanism in it. And so you could hear when the floor of the wagon fell and someone was lynched. And they would leave them there for days. And you could see and you could hear, and it was just the smell in the air. And it was very quiet. And oftentimes people were lynched for no apparent reason. This particular lynching that my great-grandmother remembers was supposedly for a young man who whistled at a white woman, and the cost was death. And then, you know, these are the moments where people are growing up and they're really aware of the oppression and the things that they can and cannot do and who's in charge. Moving fast forward, when my father was a little older, he delivered newspapers. And he and one of his friends delivered newspapers. So along with lynchings, you had instances where little black boys would go missing. And so his friend that he delivered newspapers with went missing. And no one could find him. And then, of course, his body came up in the Tar River. So everyone kind of knew what happened. He was murdered, he was killed, and he was drowned in the river. Then my father went to high school, moving fast forwarding, and he went to high school. And when he was in high school, he won the championship, the basketball championship for their town. And they advanced to the next level. And so when you advanced to the next level, you had to go to a neighboring town. And so my grandmother wouldn't let my father play in the basketball tournament because she feared that he may be lynched. Because once again, black boys were getting lynched and they were going missing. So this is something that my father constantly grew up with. And he grew up in a house full of women, not because his mother and father weren't together, but again, because his father had to seek work in Washington, D.C. And my father remembers vividly the only people in the town that had money. There was one family, and that was the Flanagans. And the Flanagans were undertakers. Everyone else in the town, in the city of Greenville, North Carolina, African Americans, that is, or blacks, as they were called then, were cotton pickers and tobacco pickers. And so my grandmother, my father's mother, wanted more for him than she was able to have. And so everyone, the whole entire family, pooled their money and sent my father and his sister to Hampton University. And boys being boys, some things never change. My father didn't do too well at Hampton University and ended up coming back home to Greenville, North Carolina. And his father was able to secure him a job as a roofer. So one summer of my father working as a roofer in 100-degree heat on top of roofs, he decided that wasn't the life he wanted. So he decided he wanted to go back to college. But at that point, my grandmother said, you know, your father and I have pooled our monies, the whole entire family pooled our monies to send you to Hampton, and you didn't do well. So you squandered your one opportunity. So my father, being very resourceful, called Morgan State University and said, hey, can I come? And they told him, yes, you can come. So my father had a one-way bus ticket to Baltimore, Maryland, and a suitcase and change. I'm not talking more than $1 and change. So he came, and that's the story of how my father came to Baltimore, Maryland, because he wanted an opportunity that wasn't there in the South. And so then that's how we ended up in Baltimore. My mother and my father were in Baltimore together. And how I ended up in Prince George's County was I went to University of Maryland, College Park. And of course, that's here in Prince George's County. loved the county and, moved around, but came back to this area because of all the resources and the diverse cultures that are here in the county.
Visit blackhistory.pgparks.com to find ways to celebrate Black history this month in Prince George's County.